Greetings, Mainers, New Englanders, and everyone else. You might be familiar, following along if you've been watching the videos, that we are going over the different ballot questions that are pertaining to Maine's elections here in 2023, coming up in no time at all. So today we're looking at question number 2. Do you want to ban foreign governments and entities that they own, control, or influence from making campaign contributions or financing communications for or against candidates or ballot questions? My immediate thought as a Mainer is, hell no. Like, why are foreign governments involved in what we do at all? If they're involved, it sounds like maybe they have some influence, maybe they have some control or manipulate. To me, it's all a little suspect. So that was just my off-the-cuff reaction. I don't know if you're like me. If you are like me, go ahead and comment down below. First we're going to look at Ballotpedia. Let me get rid of that. Main question 2. The Prohibit Foreign Spending in Elections Initiative is on ballot in Maine as an indirect initiated state statute on November 7th, 2023. A yes vote supports prohibiting foreign governments or entities with at least 5% foreign government ownership or control from spending money to influence ballot measures or candidate elections. A no vote opposes prohibiting foreign governments or entities with at least 5% foreign government ownership or control from spending money to influence ballot measures or candidate elections. I'm feeling a certain way, but I'm trying to hold off until I read a little bit more to you guys. So, this is again overview from Ballotpedia regarding question 2. How would the measure change the law regarding campaign finance? The measure would prohibit direct or indirect election spending by foreign governments, including entities with partial, 5% or more equity stake, foreign government ownership or control to influence the nomination or election of a candidate or the initiation or approval of a ballot measure. It would also require disclosure on political advertisements if a foreign government or an entity that has partial foreign government ownership or control disperses any money for the advertisement. Federal law currently prohibits contribution, donations, expenditures, including independent expenditures, and disbursements by foreign nationals to any federal, state, or local election, but not ballot measure elections. Question 2 would be adding the federal prohibition to state law and include ballot measure elections. Therefore, question 2 would prohibit foreign spending on ballot measure elections that federal law does not prohibit. Violation of the law would be considered a Class C crime. The penalty for an activity prohibited under the measure is up to $5,000 or double the amount of the contribution or expenditure involved in the violation, whichever is greater. It would also call on Maine's congressional delegation to support a federal constitutional amendment to ban foreign government spendings in elections. Okay, so to me, that makes a lot of sense. Why are foreign entities getting involved here at all? 5%, that's not much, but at the same time, when you have billions of dollars, 5%'s not much. It just has to be in equity stake. So, it's federally illegal. We're just kind of buttoning up a certain area that they failed to get to. Before I comment more, let's go on to mainepublic.org. What you need to know about question 2, which would ban foreign electioneering in Maine elections, by Steve Misler and Kevin Miller, published September 14th, 2023. Question 2 asks Maine voters, do you want to ban foreign governments and entities that they own, control, or influence from making campaign contributions or financing communications for or against candidates or ballot questions? If voters approve question 2 in November, Maine will join an emerging trend of states and localities seeking to curb foreign electioneering in campaigns, while also seeking to overhaul a landmark U.S. Supreme Court decision that has unleashed a wave of unfettered corporate spending on elections. Unfettered. I don't like that. It sounds like festering. Festering is not a good thing. Unfettered, in this particular instance, not a good thing either. While available polling suggests the concept of the proposal enjoy strong public support, critics warn that question 2 may be unconstitutional and run counter to the 2010 Citizens United ruling that the legislation ultimately seeks to overturn. Meanwhile, state press and broadcast associations have raised objections to a provision in the proposed law that would require news outlets to determine whether a prospective campaign advertisement is being purchased by a foreign government-owned company or entity or face financial penalties. Overall, question 2 aims to close a loophole in state law that currently allows companies and organizations owned by foreign governments to spend money to influence voters on state referendums. In doing so, it taps two populist state sentiments about U.S. elections. First, that the money plays an outsized role in determining outcomes, and second, that entities controlled by foreign governments should not be allowed to influence voters. The origins of Question 2. Question 2 is an outgrowth of attempts to scuttle a $1 billion electricity project in western Maine. In 2019, opponents of the transmission corridor began organizing a referendum campaign that would halt the project. As opponents gathered signatures to put the issue on ballot, Hydro-Quebec, the electricity supplier for the transmission line, formed a ballot question committee that would spend money on advertising to convince Maine voters that the corridor was in their best interest. The prospective electioneering effort by Hydro-Quebec raised a legal question, first reported by Maine Public. Can a company wholly owned by the Quebec government spend money to influence a Maine election? Very good question. The answer was yes. Maine election law and the Federal Election Campaign Act explicitly prohibit foreign nationals from contributing to or spending on behalf of candidate campaigns. However, both state and federal law are silent on the issue of foreign electioneering in state referendums. Okay, I get why we have this question now, and we need to button it up, close that loophole, stop Hydroelectric, Quebec, and other companies from other countries from electioneering, even in our state referendums. It all starts at the base, and it works its way up. I mean, if you put poison into the roots of a tree, eventually the poison will reach the leaves on the highest peak, if it lives that long. Opponents of the corridor, backed by campaign finance reformers, attempted to close the loophole in 2021, potentially sidelining Hydro-Quebec from the upcoming referendum campaign. Business groups rallied to Hydro-Quebec's cause, arguing that a proposal that would have barred the government-owned utility from electioneering was unfair and possibly unconstitutional. Those arguments were persuasive to Democratic Governor Janet Mills, who vetoed the bill after it cleared the House and Senate. Hydro-Quebec went on to spend $22.3 million on election communications during the corridor referendum. Janet Mills has got to go. It passed the House and the Senate. Clearly, we the people wanted it, and she said, nah, I'm good. We're good. I always imagine her having a raspy smoker's voice. The veto inspired the creation of the group Protect Maine Elections, which vowed to put the issue of foreign electioneering before voters and did so this year. Supporters also attempted to convince state lawmakers this year to enact the initiative and bypass the referendum. But Mills vetoed that bill too, and once again supporters of the ban couldn't muster the votes to override her. What does Question 2 do? Question 2 has several important provisions, but its main objective is to make electioneering in state, country, or municipal referendum illegal for companies or entities owned or controlled by a foreign government. If the legislation had been law in 2021, Hydro-Quebec would not have been allowed to advertise against the anti-corridor referendum. As it turns out, Canada prohibits candidate and referendum contributions from non-citizens. Canada makes it illegal, but, well, if it's not illegal here in the US, then they're not doing anything illegal. That's just scummy. They don't allow it in their own country, but they're utilizing it here in the States. And Janet Mills is all for it. Wow, this one got me worked up. I didn't think question 2 was going to do this to me. Obviously, I didn't read this article beforehand. I'm a working man, and I really just don't have time to read all of these articles. Most of the time, I do my research beforehand. I find stuff that I know will have some quality messaging or quality substance to it, and then I plan on reading it with you. Some of it I do read beforehand, but this one I did not. Similarly, if the legislation had been law and in effect this year, it would have sidelined Maine's second largest electricity provider, Versant Power, from spending against question 3, which would replace Versant and Central Maine Power with a statewide utility run by an elected board. That's because NMAX is a corporation owned by the city of Calgary, Alberta, a foreign government. Wow, I'm worked up. Alberta, a foreign government as defined in question 2 legislation. A political action committee funded by NMAX has so far amassed $8.4 million and spent $2.5 million against question 3. It doesn't say it here, but NMAX is the parent company of Versant. Question 2 also prohibits schemes that might be issued to circumvent the foreign government electioneering ban, while also requiring media outlets, TV, radio, newspapers, or internet platforms to create diligent policies, procedures, and controls that are reasonably designed to prevent foreign government-purchased election advertising on its platform. The Maine Association of Broadcasters, of which Maine Public is a member, is fiercely opposed to this provision, as is the Maine Press Association, which includes many newspapers as members. Question 2 also requires the 4 members of Maine's congressional delegation to sponsor a co-sponsor on anti-corruption resolution in Congress. According to the proposed law, the congressional resolution would be consistent with a resolution that the Maine legislature backed in 2013 that called for an amendment to the U.S. Constitution that would undo the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision. I wanted to pull up the Citizens United bill just really quickly before continuing on, because I wanted to refresh people's minds, refresh my mind, because it's something that happened in 2010. So I was still in college, I wasn't paying attention to what was going on. I did know that it was important, and I have seen the consequences of it since. So Citizens United, this is just from wikipedia.com. Citizens United versus Federal Elections Commission, 558 U.S. 310 from 2010, is a landmark decision of the Supreme Court of the United States regarding a campaign finance laws and free speech under the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. The court held 5-4 that the freedom of speech clause of the First Amendment prohibits the government from restricting independent expenditures for political campaigns by corporations, including nonprofit corporations, labor unions, and other associations. The case began after Citizens United, a conservative nonprofit organization, sought to air and advertise a film critical of then Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton shortly before the 2008 Democratic primary elections. Broadcasting the film would have been a violation of the 2002 Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, which prohibited any corporation, nonprofit organization, or labor union from making an electioneering communication within 30 days of a primary or 60 days of an election, or making any expenditure advocating the election or defeat of a candidate at any time. Citizens United challenged the constitutionality of this law, and its case reached the Supreme Court. In a majority opinion joined by 4 other justices, Associate Justice Anthony Kennedy held that the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act prohibition, wow, that took me a second, of all independent expenditures by corporations and unions violated the First Amendment's protection of free speech. The court overruled Austin versus Michigan Chamber of Commerce 1990, which had allowed a prohibition on election spending by incorporated entities, as well as a portion of McConnell versus FEC 2003 that had upheld restricted corporate spending on electioneering communications. The ruling effectively freed corporations, including incorporated nonprofit organizations, to spend money on electioneering communications and to directly advocate for the election or defeat of candidates. In a dissenting opinion, Associate Justice John Paul Stevens argued that the court's ruling represented a rejection of the common sense of the American people who have recognized a need to prevent corporations from undermining self-government. Amen. Dissenting opinion by Associate Justice John Paul Stevens. A rejection of the common sense of the American people who have recognized a need to prevent corporations from undermining self-government. Okay, so that's Citizens United. Schemy, corrupt businesses can put money towards or against candidates that they favor, that they pay off, and they don't need to disclose where that money comes from. The campaigns don't. A key distinction, so back on Maine Public. A key distinction, foreign-owned versus foreign government-owned. Since the debate began over question 2, there has been some confusion and outright conflation of how proposed law would affect businesses with foreign owners or foreign investors. That concern over silencing Maine companies with foreign ownership was part of the government's argument against the first iteration of the bill in 2021. Entities with direct foreign investment employed thousands of Mainers, Mills wrote in her veto message. They include Stratton Lumber, Woodland Pulp and Paper, Backyard Farms, McCain Foods, Sprague Energy, just to name a few. Legislation that could bar these entities from any form of participation in a referendum is offensive to the democratic process, which depends on a free and unfettered exchange of ideas, information, and opinion. There's that word again, unfettered. And in this case, I do think unfettered is a good thing, but I do think that Janet Mills is weaponizing it in a bad way. However, that proposal and question 2 don't explicitly target foreign-owned companies. It targets companies or organizations owned or controlled by foreign governments. Nevertheless, how the proposed law defines ownership and control by these foreign governments is a key issue. Versant Power has acknowledged that it would be affected by the electioneering prohibition, but what about CMP, which is owned by Spain-based Iberdrola, which I kept pronouncing wrong in my first video about it. I kept saying Iberdrola, but it's Iberdrola. So Iberdrola, Spain-based company, which in turn is partially owned by a sovereign wealth fund controlled by the Qatari government. CMP says it's unaffected by the proposed ban, but it still lobbied against the bill that would have enacted question 2 in the legislation this year. The more I learn, the more all of this is suspect. I mean, question 2, it's all connected to CMP and foreign money coming into the state of Maine. And they inundated and tried to overwhelm us with all these questions that seem disconnected, but at the heart of it, they are connected. Question 2 defines foreign government ownership and control as a firm partnership, corporation, association, organization, or other entity that a foreign government or foreign government-owned entity holds, owns, controls, or otherwise has direct or indirect beneficial ownership of a 5% or more of the total equity, outstanding voter shares, or direct dictates, controls, or directly or indirectly participates in the decision-making process with regard to the activities of the firm, partnership, corporation, association, organization, or other entity. There's a lot of mouthfuls involved with this election. The definition hasn't settled the debate over question 2's potential impact, however. The Forest Products Council, which represents an array of timber-based companies and landowners with foreign investors, testified this year that the question's 5% rule would be very difficult to follow for businesses including U.S.-based businesses that are publicly traded and may have foreign government pensions funds as investors at any time. Mills cited similar concerns in her veto letter this year, describing it as so broad that it could theoretically incorporate businesses that are 95% owned and operated by the citizens of Maine. Supporters of Question 2 sharply dispute those characterizations. Protect Maine Elections Chairman, State Senator Rick Bennett, Republican from Oxford, says the proposal is narrowly tailored compared to its counterparts in other states and localities, and that its primary aim is to prevent foreign governments from exerting influence on Maine referendum elections through corporate subsidiaries. I have to agree. Mills's arguments are weak water. No, her arguments are not good, and I can't see how making it so foreign governments can't come into the states and start picking away at our freedoms. I mean, if it has to start here in Maine, it should. So Maine goes, so goes the country, so goes the nation. And Maine, the way life should be, dear ago, I lead. So I think we need to lead the way in making Question 2, saying yes to Question 2, and making it so that foreign entities can't start buying stocks into our companies and having influence over us. It's not okay. And it's happened, but now we need to call it quits. There has to come a point where we say enough is enough, let's clean up what we have and start fresh. But we're saying no. In the future, we can readdress this if it turns out poorly, but putting control back in the Mainers' hands, back in U.S. citizens' hands, back in we the people's hands, yeah, that's important. Is Question 2 constitutional? Two more sections to go. There are two arguments over the constitutionality of Question 2. The first involves the legality of restricting political speech, which includes campaign advertising. The other involves the due diligence mandate in Question 2 that requires news outlets to determine whether an advertising communication on their platform is paid for by a foreign government-owned company or organization. While supporters and opponents of Question 2 point to several court cases that bolster their respective views, a court case analogous to the restrictions on political speech that Question 2 proposes appears elusive. For that reason, we won't get into the arguments in detail, but those interested can read supporters' case here and opponents' case here. Nevertheless, if Question 2 passes, its restrictions on political speech might face a legal challenge. It's unclear whether Question 2's due diligence mandate for press outlets awaiting a similar fate, but First Amendment concerns are also an issue. The Maine Press Association in July issued a scathing critique of the proposal through its attorney while urging Mills to veto it. The MPA letter framed the requirements as affecting news outlets' independent control over what they publish and restrict and burden speech about public issues in Maine by forcing news outlets to create an oppressive, time-consuming, and costly self-censorship regime. The Maine Association of Broadcasters also cited First Amendment concerns while saying that the due diligence requirement would place an almost impossible burden on Maine broadcasters operating on fast turnaround deadlines for placing advertisement and often with a skeleton staff. It added this law would essentially require broadcast outlets to become detective agencies, tasked with investigating the source of funding for any and all campaigns. Aaron McKean, legal counsel for the Campaign Legal Center, countered that the due diligence requirements are not nearly as onerous as news associations have described them. McKean said commercial broadcast outlets are already required to keep a political file that tracks political advertising for each election. He said that the penalty provision in Question 2 isn't meant to punish broadcasters or news outlets for not discovering that a foreign government entity has gone through great lengths to conceal its funding of an advertisement, a requirement that would require deep knowledge of campaign finance. He described the provision as a reasonable standard designed to ensure that foreign government entities can't use news outlets to break the law. It's not entirely clear what question 2's due diligence policies might look like in practice or how they might be enforced. The legislation suggests enforcement might fall to the Maine Ethics Commission, which regulates state campaign finance laws. But Director Jonathan Wayne says the proposal is ambiguous on the point and that the agencies would have to create rules clarifying the standards while also balancing First Amendment protections for the press if question 2 passes. The Commission respects the First Amendment, and any policy decisions that would have to be made down the road would be consistent with the First Amendment. And I think in general, we're not looking to regulate broadcasters or news organizations, he said. That's not what we see as our current role. Wayne also noted the news organizations are already prohibited from running ads that don't contain a disclosure saying who paid for them. In theory, he said, the Commission could find news organizations that allow such ads to run. But in practice, we never do, he said. We always hold the party who's responsible for the content of the ad to task if they are not including all the right information. So now we're getting on to the last part of this. It was a pretty informative article, and I like it. It wasn't a fluff piece, gave lots of information. So now, finishing up, the Citizens United connections. One of the reasons state and national campaign finance reformers support question 2 is because it seeks to reverse the effects of the Citizens United decision that yielded it an explosion in campaign spending by corporations. The anti-corruption provision in question 2 is an overt attempt to undo Citizens United, but the proposal also has roots to other ambitious initiatives that would blunt the flow of corporate campaign cash, even if Congress doesn't nullify the Supreme Court's landmark ruling with amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Some of those proposals were introduced in the previous legislative session. They didn't just target electioneering by companies controlled by foreign governments, but also electioneering by corporations with foreign ownership. Lawmakers balked at those proposals, but campaign finance reformers viewed them as key to blunting the spending unleashed by Citizens United. Minnesota's legislation recently passed such a law dubbed the Democracy for People Act. In June, the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce challenged the constitutionality of the law, and some of the same campaign finance reform groups that testified in favor of similar bills in Maine or organizing to defend it in court. In that context, question 2 is a more narrow attempt to curb spending on elections by corporations with foreign ownership. Opponents of the legislation don't view it that way and have thus framed it as a proposal nearly as sweeping as electioneering bans in foreign-owned companies that Maine lawmakers abandoned in 2021. Again, that article was by Steve Missler and Kevin Miller, and it came out on the 14th of 2023 in Maine Public. Of course, I'll include the links down below, and I'm also going to include the link for mainecleanelections.org. A MCCE, Maine Citizens for Clean Elections, which on the top sounds really good. I guess anytime it comes with the government, with elections, I'm always so skeptical. I don't want to be. I mean, I'm a pretty skeptical person, but if you're someone that I trust and respect and you tell me something, unless it's way overboard, chances are I'm probably gonna believe you, or I'm gonna take you at face value. When it comes to elections or government or policies, I treat you like a wild animal while I'm camping. Like, as long as I don't cross your path too much, and if I don't look at you, you're not gonna attack me. But I gotta know what you're doing and where you're at, because I don't trust you. You could do anything at any moment. You're like a wild animal, and it could attack, it could eat away at my rights. No. So again, this video is not to tell you how to vote. I just wanted to bring to light some of the different information available for each different question. This has been question 2. Once again, it says, do you want to I'm not editing this, So you're just gonna have to deal with it, and as I do this more, I should get better at it. I got a little worked up, so my mouth started working slower than my eyes were reading, so I'll do better. Mrs. Vachon, I remember. She was my junior high French teacher, French and Spanish actually, and we always had to read out loud, and we have to pause after every sentence, and we had to do very old school, and I'm thankful now. I think she's probably long gone, but hats off to you, Mrs. Vachon. You cranky old woman. Question 2. Do you want to ban foreign governments and entities that they own, control, or influence from making campaign contributions or financing communications for or against candidates or ballot questions? So these are all questions that are going to be coming up in November 7th, which is right around the corner. I'm going to have multiple videos probably coming out a day because I really feel that this election is important. And the more that we know, the more power that we have, and the less power that we can give away. Because let's be honest, there are entities out there that want to take the power, take our freedom from us. And I'm going to stand here and say, hell nah! And I hope you will with me. So on that note, go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. You'll get all notifications for the upcoming questions and after the election cycle, just Maine news in general. If you have anything to say, please go ahead down below, leave a comment, leave a like. Those things really do help the algorithm. So until next time, I hope you all have a great night.